Good afternoon. I want to welcome you all to one of the afternoon sessions talking about research that GFN recently released. Research, by the way, that was made possible entirely by all of your support. You provided the data. This data is meaningful. You've heard over the last couple of days how important our partners in the rest of the NGO world and advocacy world really need this data to help inform the debates and discussions going forward. So I want to begin this afternoon by saying thank you to you all, because the research that we've released thus far would not have been able to be released without your help. So thank you very much. You own this as much as GFN does. You all should have seen, or at least had an opportunity to grab one of these copies of our new report, Waste Not, Want Not. If you didn't get a hard copy, there's also one provided, a thumb drive, digitally. Please look at this. It's a useful tool to tell the story of the food banking movement in your community and to your supporters and to your governments. And what I want to do very quickly is talk about what we have found through this study. This study is, in fact, the second of two. The first study we released was in October, on World Food Day in October, the state of global food banking. For many people, awareness of food banking is limited largely to high-income countries. And they're aware of Feeding America, perhaps food banks in Canada or FBLI, but they weren't as aware of food banks operating throughout Latin America, in Africa, and in Asia, and we wanted to tell that story. So our first study was State of Global Food Banking, to give a broader picture of food banks operating around the world. And this study, the second one, is Waste Not, Want Not, which is to measure the impact, to give not a total picture, but a very good sense as to what is going on around the globe. This lays out how food banks are addressing hunger needs and how they align with the SDGs. The challenge that we need to promote and the opportunity that food banks provide is the link between hunger and food wastage and the benefit it provides to society. As you know, over the last 3 years, hunger has been on the increase. Those people who are undernourished, chronically undernourished, are considered hunger by FAO standards. But every country has some level of food insecurity. And food banks, as a model, as one of the modes of helping low-income people who struggle with food poverty, it's an important message to say that this model can be replicated in high-income countries, middle-income countries, and low-income countries. Wherever commercial food systems are stable, there's an opportunity to feed more hungry people with this model and government support, and is a way to also reduce food wastage. At the same time that we're seeing hunger increase, we're also seeing enormous amounts of food wasted around the globe. More than 1.3 billion tons of food is lost or wasted. This is food that is, in many cases, in nearly all cases, for human consumption and is edible. Food banks, of course, take the product that is surplus and wholesome, and I think we make that distinction, but it's important to know that the mode of operation which food banks use is actually operates at a nexus between the need of low-income hungry people and a way to prevent food wastage, and then also increase or mitigate environmental damage. You are, in fact, the triple win. You reduce the food waste, you strengthen civil society, and you feed hungry people. To give you some sense, and again, for these numbers, we are very grateful for our friends at FBLI and Feeding America. We wanted to give the best picture of our partner organizations for the data they were able to provide. And as you can see, the food bank model is already serving 62 million needy people, removing 2.6 million metric tons of food wastage from landfills and redirecting that to help feed needy people through networks of more than 1,500 food banks operating around the globe. And the net effect of that activity, just of the food waste prevention, is to prevent 10.5 billion kilograms of greenhouse gas emissions from landfill. The impact of this work is not simply the numbers. It shows the alignment of the food bank model overall to the Sustainable Development Goals. SDG 2, and we've heard this the last 2 days, but it's important to have the data to support this. SDG 2, Zero Hunger, calls for the access by all people, in particular the poor and the vulnerable, to safe, nutritious, sufficient food all year round. The work you do provides that. And right now it's helping to feed 62 million people in 57 countries. There's actually more countries. We don't have all the data, but we have data for 57 countries. This aligns then to SDG 12, responsible consumption, and the target 12.3 of halving food waste. In the GFN network alone, GFN, FEBA, and Feed America, 2.68 million tons of safe food is avoided from landfill, and that's a total of 2.96 million cubic yards of landfill waste. At lunch today, we were speaking with one of our member food banks, and we're talking about the societal impact, which can be quantified on the food that's prevented from going into landfill and the number of hungry people served. But there's also, and you all know this, is that there's also a broader societal impact of food banks. The work you do providing food helps transform lives of people in your communities. You strengthen the overall institutions of civil society. In the GFN network alone, nearly 60,000 agencies receive support to the food banks in the GFN system. Feeding America, roughly the same number. Another 60,000 local agencies are served. You mobilize community support to care for the vulnerable. You fill in gaps in public sector safety nets. You are, in essence, the safety net of the safety net. And that makes your work valuable and important and should be celebrated. Not because you're the alternative to government, but because you reinforce the work of government. Mostly you mitigate the food poverty and the commensurate high cost of hunger that society bears when low-income people do not have enough to maintain healthy lifestyles. In addition, the environmental impact of food banks is that at the heart of what we do is feeding hungry people, but the environmental impact of food banks makes our mode somewhat unique and important. You reduce the food waste in the present, you redirect these to hungry people, and the removal from landfills also means that we mitigate the amount of natural resources that would have been lost in the production of that product. As you can see that from the chart is that 33% of food that is wasted, if we were to capture just 25% of that, in Latin America, we could feed 300 million additional people. In Africa, same thing, 200 million people. And in Europe, 200 million people. If just a quarter of the food waste and loss was prevented. It's in part why GFN, after hearing what you've all told us over the past year, is partnering with Harvard Law School's Food Law and Policy Clinic. We want to get the right policies in place so you can better capture something closer to that 25% in your own communities. In addition to the hunger relief aspects, again, 10.5 billion kilograms of greenhouse gases are prevented. That is the equivalent of generating enough electricity for 1.8 million homes over the course of a year. Your work is the equivalent of not having all the electricity for nearly 2 million homes, and is the equivalent of 2.2 million passenger vehicles taken off the road. The food bank model has enormous potential. The collective impact you all have in feeding hungry people, preventing food waste, and mitigating greenhouse gases. You are part of a vital economy in your communities and in your nations to help society and help the environment and better steward the environment. The report, as you look at it, also has calls for how government can be more involved. First and foremost, and there has been some question about this, first and foremost is advocating for the establishment, support, and expansion of social safety net programs by governments. Governments have the primary role to feed their people. Food banks come in to complement that role, to fill in those gaps when the safety net is insufficient. Governments can also quantify food loss and waste. Less than half the governments around the globe actually quantify what their food loss and waste is. We want to encourage governments to establish public policies in food liability protections, tax policy, and food labeling laws that make it easier for you to capture donated food, surplus food that is wholesome and safe for low-income people. We want governments and want to encourage governments to partner with you all in the expansion of social safety net programs. There will be some places in which government simply can't go as effectively or as efficiently as volunteer networks supported by the private sector can go. Never a replacement, but can be supportive of. And then finally, we want to recommend that in a much broader sense around the globe, that governments work to measure food insecurity in more precise terms so we can be better at our work in helping to support their work. There's also a call to action for business. And I'm happy to say that this research that we've recently conducted was supported by our friends in corporate America. They want to know too. They want to know how many people we're serving, how much food waste mitigation goes on through our activity, and how they can be helpful to us and to you in your communities. Business can better measure and manage their food loss and waste. You should, and we would strongly encourage you to develop and implement global donation programs. And if you haven't heard from Anthony Kitchen yet, you will. Standardizing food label recording. Champions 12.3 and the Consumer Goods Forum are pushing a two-label model in which one is must be used by for a product that is perishable, and another label for best by when you can actually use it for a much longer shelf life. That way you don't have countries saying that the product is 30 days past code and you can't give it to a hungry person. They seem minor, but these changes in just food labeling laws themselves help put more food out of landfill and into the homes of needy people who suffer from food poverty. And then we also want to encourage, again, the data supports that when the food industry supports food banks in their local communities, it creates a business win, a win-win for them and for the society in which they operate and do business. For multilateral institutions like FAO, the United Nations, and others, ongoing work to gather better data by country and by commodity. One of the challenges we found with this research is that data simply isn't always available, and for our purposes of our research, we use the most conservative estimates when it wasn't available, but there isn't enough data that to make, again, the precise policy recommendations we'd like. And we believe that and when it comes to overseas development assistance and other relief opportunities, that more and more that UN agencies can use food banks and their logistics models in times of food crisis or disaster. Now, you can get more of these resources online, including how we did the measurement of the greenhouse gases, and you can access the report here. We will have a Spanish version available soon, and this is just one of two studies. Like I said, I hope you also get the State of Global Food Banking. That should also be on the thumb drive. And what I'm going to do now is invite some panelists up to talk about the studies, then open up for Q&A. So if we could do that. Yes? So joining us on stage is, to my immediate right, is Dr. Marcella Lambert. She's the Vice President of Environmental and Social Governance Program Manager at Bank of America in Mexico City. To her right is Nicola Dixon, Executive Director of the General Mills Foundation. To her right is Samina Anwar, Risk Operations and Execution Leader for Cargill, United Kingdom. And to her right is Yves Lee, the founder of the Green Food Bank in China. And instead of me running in front of you guys, I'm just at the podium and ask you guys some questions, if that's all right. And I would like to begin with my friend Yves Lee, whose operations I got to see in Shanghai. Yves, your food bank this study talks about the nexus between feeding hungry people and preventing food waste. And in fact, in Shanghai, the idea to start a food bank was in response initially to a food waste issue. A local environmental group named Green Oasis was researching ways to alleviate food waste and learned about the benefits of food banking. As our report details, food banks are a green solution to hunger. As a founder of the Green Food Bank, can you tell us a little about the progress you've seen in addressing and spurring action towards zero hunger and reduction of food waste in Shanghai?
First of all, I'd like to thank the organizer for inviting me to participate in this discussion. Actually, when I say yes, I didn't realize that I have to speak English. So, I'd also like to thank you in advance for your patience. Although I've been working for a non-profit organization for over 10 years, but in food banking, I'm still quite new. As Doug just said, the establishment of food bank, Green Oasis, is really due to our concern about the food waste in mainland China and its negative impact to the environment. Green Oasis used to be an environmental conservation organization. It's in 2014, we conducted a survey about food waste and in mainland China, mainly in Shanghai, because our office is located in Shanghai, actually. And we found that the food waste problem is quite real, serious, so serious. So at that time, I have no idea about what food bank. So we initiate a project called food sharing. And then I got an email from Jeffen, asked me to invite me to participate in FBLI. And at that time, I think, it's United States, it's so far. But when I come to first time come to Houston, I was like, how to say, just quite inspired because everyone called me food banker, and I suddenly find that there are so many people in the world. They are using very good solution. They have very good solution to food waste and to hunger problem. So when I come back to Shanghai, I immediately decided that our organization should be a food bank, and which is the first one in mainland China. So it's an interesting story. And come back to Doug's question, I can't agree more that food banks are a green intervention. I often tell people that, but I often tell people that the human stomach actually is the most environmental friendly garbage disposal. So it is estimated in mainland China, there are about 18 million tons of food are wasted each year and this figure is likely to be even larger because we don't have any official survey. If we can reduce half food waste or loss, zero hunger will no longer be a problem. However, China is a country with a large gap between rural and urban and among different areas. Also, the problem varies in different areas, which poses a great challenge to our work. However, we are pleased to see that some new food banker like institutions have appeared in various regions. So maybe next year we will invite our partners to participate in FBLI, and our mission actually is to form a food bank network in mainland China. So thank you.
And we are certainly hopeful that you are successful in the expansion of the food bank model throughout mainland China. It's very exciting to see food banking operate in mainland China, I think, and in Hong Kong as well, and throughout Asia. There is great potential for the expansion of the model. Samina, if I may ask you a question. Cargill has been an invaluable supporter of food banking model for many years, actually since the founding of GFN, I believe. You're currently working with food banks in 19 different countries to help them achieve their goals. Why has Cargill chosen to make food banking such an important part of your overall activities and support?
I think it's a great question. So first of all, thank you for inviting us to the panel. And I'm not here on my own. The Cargill team is also in the audience. So if you do have questions for us, please do grab them as well at the end of the session. So just to give you some background, I think, on Cargill, just in case you're not aware of the company, we were founded 150 years ago and have remained privately held as a company. And so what that allows us to do is really plan and invest for the long term for the benefit of all of our stakeholders. So Cargill provides food, agriculture, financial and industrial products and services to the world. Together with our farmers, our customers, our governments and communities, we really look to help people thrive. And we try to apply our insights and over 150 years of experiences to anything that we're working on. We've got 150,000 people that work within Cargill across 70 different countries. And we are committed to feeding the world in a responsible and sustainable way, reducing environmental impact and improving really the communities that we live in and work in. And our purpose is to be a global leader in nourishing people. In terms of addressing food security, it really requires understanding the interconnections across the food system. So as such, Cargill has really chosen to focus on several pillars of sustainability as key focus areas for the company. So they include climate change, water resources, land use, food loss and waste, and farmer prosperity, in addition to food security and nutrition. And that's a key focus area for us.
And you would see the food banks then as a nexus between those different goals, right?
Absolutely.
Greenhouse gas emission reduction.
Yeah.
Perfect. And then that's kind of the next question to you, Nicola, is that General Mills was one of the founding companies, or one of the companies that helped found and support Feeding America food banks at the very beginning when they were struggling. They began as community organized entities that struggled, right? And you had food waste changes or challenges within your supply chain. How does General Mills see food banks today as a partner in dealing with surplus product, preventing food loss and waste throughout the supply chain?
Absolutely. So I think we would say that at General Mills, food banks are a vital partner, and I would say more relevant than ever. Somewhat similar to Cargill, and actually the General Mills World Headquarters happens to be just down the road from Cargill in Minneapolis, Minnesota, though quite different as companies. So just by way of context, General Mills operates around the world across 6 continents, but the brands you might know, depending on where you sit, can be different. So you might know like Haagen-Dazs ice cream, or Old El Paso Mexican, or Betty Crocker, Pillsbury, or Yoki in Brazil, Wan Chai Fairy dumplings in China, etc. And so I mention that to say that just as General Mills products can be found across many of the communities that are represented in this room, so too are food banks. And we believe that as much as we are making every effort, and have been for decades, to really minimize any waste as we source food and bring added value processes to the food and package it for marketing to consumers, we believe it is realistic some surplus will occur. And to the extent that there is any surplus food, we are always, of course, wanting that food to go to help nourish communities and people rather than going to landfill. And so very critical partners. The one piece I'd add, because Doug mentioned the creation of both Feeding America and more recently Global Food Banking Network, while our company, similar to Cargill, is about 151 years old, what we didn't have 50 years ago were food bank networks. Certainly there were some community-based operations that had food service and meal providing types of services for clients, but nothing like what has occurred over the last decade and 4 decades between GFN and Feeding America. And that's transformational for us because core to our values is helping to nourish the world and do the right thing. We want food to be very well used to feed people. And if but not for food banks, we would only be able to have an impact within our own four walls. You know, we can donate maybe 30 million meals a year, which is sort of currently where we are on our own, but together with all of you in this room and your colleagues back at home, together we're enabling, as Doug shared, you know, closer to 3 million tons per year altogether. So we see infinite potential, and we absolutely believe that food banks are amongst the world's most powerful and smart levers to strategically address hunger, while also addressing so many of the sustainability concerns that we all share, whether it's climate and greenhouse reduction or freshwater use, you know, feeding hungry people, et cetera. So whether you come at it from hearts or minds, we feel like food banks are an incredibly brilliant place to invest. And we get kind of passionate about it. I'll try to keep my passion under control. But we are really working to encourage others to sort of see the same light, that see, to us, it's a no-brainer. It's where people ought to be investing.
Thank you, Nicola. Dr. Lambert, Waste Not Want Not highlights some of the innovative programs, strategies, and policies that food banks are implementing to better serve hungry people and promote economic mobility. What difference do you see food banks making in the communities they serve in Mexico and elsewhere around the globe?
Okay, well, first I want to thank you, Global Food Bank Network. And as you know, we are a leading financial institution. We have a presence in 35 countries. And I am proud to be one of the 200,000 employees in our company. And the bank is really a social responsible corporation. They signed the ODS, and since 2012, the bank has an alliance with the Global Food Bank Network. And now we are really proud to be one of the sponsors of this event. And we are also proud to join recently with Cargill, I don't know, Cargill, my pronunciation is not correct, in support of this report. We not also want to help the community we serve. We want to be part of solving this problem, the hunger problem. We really, in our business, we want to be part of this solution. We really believe that the key factor to really achieve that is to support food banks all over the world. Food access must be achieved in order to achieve economic mobility. We are convinced that students that cannot do well in school, do not do well in school, it's because they are not well nourished. This is something that is really important. Everybody hears that 821 million people go hungry, but what's amazing is that it's unbelievable that 1.3 billion tons of good food is wasted. And recently we did a study in Mexico, not we did, World Bank did a very nice study. We discovered something that it's really terrible. Every minute in Mexico we throw to the garbage 27 tons of good food, and this is a conservative number. And we really want to help to achieve zero hunger. We really want to help to reduce food waste and loss. And in Mexico, if we could save just half of the food that we throw to the garbage every day, with half of that, no Mexican will have hunger. You know, if we save just half of that. So lack of food is not the problem. The main problem now is food waste and loss. And food banks are indispensable, an indispensable green intervention toward zero hunger and sustainability. Food bank model has been proven very successful all over the world. And we believe that it plays a very important role in availability, access, utilization, and stability over time. We are there are three roles very important for the food banks, many roles, but the three most important is feed the need people not able to work, especially elder people, street children, disabled people, and feed the need people able to work during a phase that they don't have a job. And in order to cut poverty, we need to help them to have a job. We need to train, to give capacity building in order to cut poverty. And something that the food banks are doing really well is to help under disaster relief. They are really good on that. They go to many places that no one can go.
Especially in the United States, we've seen this, where the food bank model has a long history of disaster relief. I think we are very interested in exploring how we can help even do that more effectively around the globe. And I also want to say the World Bank study done in Mexico is also referenced in the report. And where some of food banks like Food Forward South Africa and others have partnered with other entities and have done their own environmental assessments as well as measuring the number of people they're serving. Those are also included in this report, so I'd encourage you to look at those, and you may think about how you can do that as well in your own community. Which is kind of a good segue. Yves, I want to ask you another question. Is that Waste Not prevents many recommendations, right, on how food banks can scale up to meet increasing need. You mentioned a little bit about in China, about the desire that the food bank model could be used in other parts of the country. What do you think are the most critical interventions or partnerships needed in your context that could help facilitate the growth of food banks and better achieve SDGs 2 and 12.3?
I think the recommendations made in Waste Not, Want Not for both government and the business are all very important and valuable. In mainland China, because food bank is still quite a new thing and needed to be promoted and popularized, so it is very important for like enterprises to take a lead, to give support to emerging food bankers. I'm happy to see that most of enterprises present here, like Jeremy, the Bank of America, Griffiths, all support us a lot in China. And Chinese often say that because Chinese really love crabs, so but it's like weird for some other people from other country. But Chinese often say that the first person to eat crab is great. We need more and more crab-eating companies to demonstrate to the others, especially local companies, because local companies normally they don't donate. They have a lot of worries about food safety. So most of our donors actually are multi-country, multinational companies. In addition, I think the role of government is also very important. In China, although the government, they have realized the problem of food waste. We have some initiatives like cleaning dishes action, and some other initiatives to reduce food waste. But on the whole, the serious problem of food waste has not been put on any agenda. However, hunger actually have got a wider concern by government and by NGOs. We have launched some programs like free lunch. But such programs can only solve children's hunger problem at school, not after school, and their breakfast. I remember, I think it's 2017. Lisa actually visited China and Shanghai, and we take her and Craig to a migrant school, And then we met some children, and Lisa asked her, I asked their child whether you have breakfast or not. Their child said, oh, because my parents are quite busy, I actually haven't had a breakfast. So it's still a problem. If we can reduce food loss and waste and make full use of them, I think hunger problem can be better solved. Food banks can significantly reduce food waste and hunger. However, we need government's support to introduce tax cuts, because in China, if companies donate food, they have to pay tax. it's not that good, and we hope government can change food labor system. I do hope through the participation of different sectors, food banks can play a great role, and it definitely will in achieve SDGs.
Thank you, right. And I think I'm a crab eater, so. So Samina, I want to ask a question. Waste Not, Want Not documents food banks operate in nearly every high-income country.
Yeah.
And in most now middle-income countries, but not all. And do you think the food bank model can be effectively expanded to low-income countries? I ask that because this morning there was questions about the expansion of food banking in Africa, for example, and certainly great need and a desire to expand in Asia as well. So can you speak to that?
Okay, so I think, food banks definitely have an important role to play in enriching any community. And it's at every income level around the world. And so everybody deserves to have nutritious food. And Brian mentioned it, I think, in the session earlier on today. He talked about the uniqueness and the context in which food banks can actually apply their knowledge to their local communities. And really, if we look at the developing world, the developed world, rural, urban, really food banks can apply all of their knowledge to any context and really any example. And what's important about really the Sustainable Development Goals is that they are universal. They apply to every country, every person around the world. And really food banks are really actually quite well equipped to have solutions to meet those global goals around the world. So, and if we think about some of the experiences that we've had so far with all of you, certainly the work that Cargill's done, food banks have become really innovative. They look at meeting hunger, they look at meeting food waste, and we certainly see continued opportunities to really support that expansion across all of the communities where we live and we work, for sure. And if we think about really, it's at a local level where the food banks, they absolutely understand the food security issues that exist in their location, and they can very, very quickly get at and eradicate that in a way that really no one company, no one government can do. So it's really important that they're available on the ground and able to do that. And so we see that application applying to whether it's low income, high income, any country around the world. And we've certainly got examples as Cargill where we worked on many different things with food banks, for example, cooling storage, making sure perishable goods can be preserved, working with farmers really to invest some of their crop to the hungry. And more recently, certainly with Feeding America, we're now working on a diabetes program. So how can we now take that one step further with our food banks and show how food banks are actually improving chronic diseases and really bringing that well-being really to people. So we see it as a really important aspect.
That's wonderful, and I think it's exciting. I think, again, much of the conversation this week has been about different ways that food banks can expand and vary their program offerings, right, and nutrition assistance and the variety of food that's offered. Nicola, Waste Not Want Not highlights the importance of partnerships across various sectors, and that's SDG 17. Mills has been a valued partner of GFN's, as you mentioned from the beginning, and we're grateful for that. What do you see as the broader potential for the private sector to address the SDGs over the next decade? Because the clock's ticking, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Sustainable Development Goals have been really helpful in a lot of ways. We've probably had some good discussion and debate internally with partners around to what extent everyday people on the street, the public, have a familiarity with the global goals and whether or not that they're familiar and aware. While I don't know that we will be speaking to consumers explicitly about the Sustainable Development Goals, what we have found is it's been a very useful common strategic framework for cross-sector collaboration and planning. And so, in an environment where we believe that absolutely no single sector, not big food companies all over the world, not just government, not just, civil society and NGOs, none of us alone could sort of solve for this. I mean, absolutely, it requires an all-in effort, and everybody's sort of bringing what they can. And for that reason, I think the SDGs are very, powerful. So, a case in point, so certainly SDG 2, ending hunger is sort of a very much an anchoring point for many of us, and we really feel like it informed. If you look at the role of food across all the global goals, it just permeates every one of them. But SDG 12.3, of course, Dave Lewis from Tesco is also chairman of the Champions 12.3 initiative globally. Talked about this on Monday during the kickoff, but you think of the power that is now happening in engaging multiple major food manufacturers, retailers, distributors, and others all along that farm to fork continuum all over the world are officially, committing and signing up to cut by half current levels of food waste by 2030. And so these things very quickly become quite real and tangible when you're signing on to achieve significant reductions in a time frame for which most people signing will still be engaged in their career and not retired. And so, I think for us, it's very real. It's coming at a time where more than ever, if the urgency was not clear previously, certainly with climate and what we're seeing there, and in other sort of social and environmental symptoms, we know there's urgency. So having a common framework in the SDGs can be quite helpful. We do know that we have to break it down, and we talked about in some of the earlier sessions today the need to sort of know your audiences and think about the stakeholders you might be speaking to at any given time. And so even within our employee base of about 38,000 people around the globe, so roughly about the population of the country of Monaco, we find, my colleagues, we have to continually be mindful of where even our colleagues are in different departments or in different countries with respect to their understanding of how much food insecurity exists around the world and in their own backyard, their level of understanding and awareness of how much food loss and waste is occurring, and where they sit in terms of their ability to influence or affect change. And so a lot of our effort is not just working cross-sector as a coalition outside our four walls, but even inside our own company. We find we're continuously having to expand the large and growing group of individuals who absolutely see a tremendous opportunity to concurrently drive positive benefits that feed more people, nourish more people, and help to really help society, mitigate the level of food loss and waste that's going on. So we can't be complacent and assume that, those champions will be there as different employees join the company, and as there are other changes and other competing priorities, we just have to continuously inform and engage them in dialogue and solutions.
Okay, and that's why we do this research, right? Is that all of us that operate in the space, we know about food wastage, and we know about the growing issues of hunger and poverty in our own communities. But a report like this is meant to help broaden that discussion, right? And again, we know how the food bank mode is, but we need to articulate and show the impact of that model of feeding hungry people through preventing food wastage, right? And so there's a lot of talk of that, but I think especially for banks and economists and others, the role of food banks as builders of civil society is important too, right? And we need to articulate that as well. Wouldn't you agree, Dr. Lumbert?
Yep.
Okay. Well, please do.
Well, one thing that I it's very important now, it's to help all the banks to escalate the programs. And I want to point something that when I met Dr. Moes in 5 years ago, an event like that, I asked him, how can we start? And he gave me one answer, and I want to share that with you. It's, you should start with credibility. And I believe that, you know, now we need to work on so many things to really, all of us, achieve what we want, zero hunger. Credibility is very important. Second, transparency is very important. Money, it's really important, but okay, we need an interdisciplinary approach. We need to make alliances. It's impossible that alone will solve the problem. One key thing on finding the solution is to learn how to do alliance with private corporations, government, international institutions, NGOs, academia. Academia is very important. We have a chair with a university in Mexico helping us to do research. This is very important. We need to do a national campaign. I don't say global campaign because each country and region is different. But everybody that wants to succeed, they need a national campaign. You need to involve the whole community at all levels. We need a national law. This is something that we are really trying to work a lot in Mexico to get a national law and a national strategy. We need self-sustainable models. We cannot rely just on donations. It's something that we learned through those years. We need good methodology. When you try to, there are so many good models all over the world, but when you try to copy something from other countries, very important that you take the time to really adapt or tropicalize the methodology. Banks need a lot of help in infrastructure, in technology, professionalize. They need volunteer. Volunteer is a key factor. We don't need any volunteers. We need to classify the volunteers. We need to professionalize the volunteers. We need to promote best practices. We need innovation. Dr. Moes told us about something that he did in Egypt, about something very simple, to change the size of the plate on the buffet from 32 centimeters to 27. We did that in Mexico. You know, the restaurants and hotels that did that, they were really, it's unbelievable. They could save a lot of food, between 20 to 35%. And we did that in a small scale. Now, our big challenge is to escalate. And I want to say something. Bank of America, it's not just donate. They don't want to donate, just donate. They want to become partners in programs. They want to help to train, to help in resources, to provide volunteers. Every year, all over the world, we collect 2 million hours of volunteer work. And in all 35 countries, most of our employees are involved in doing volunteer work for food banks. And we need expertise, and we are really proud to be part of this solution. And thank you very much for inviting us to be
thank you.
here.
And really, that is how the food bank model works, right? Is that it is all parts of the private sector coming together, the faith community, academia to help report on this, and not just the food industry, as critical as it is, because that's how we provide our benefit, but all elements of the private sector coming together. And in the end, that makes that community stronger, right? Working with government, because ultimately feeding hungry people is government's role, but especially even in the United States, government falls short too often. And we can't let people suffer, so bringing the private sector more deeply engaged at all elements is hugely helpful.
And there is something that is amazing. This is not a problem of lack of food all over the world. The problem is more a logistic and a goodwill problem. If we do those two things by 2030, we'll be able to achieve that.
Agreed. Thank you. Now, it's my understanding that we're going to open it up to questions from the audience. By the way, thank you all very much. You don't get away. Do we have mics? Yeah, there we go. Okay. Any questions? Yes.
Hi, my name is Emma Walsh from Food Cloud. Thanks very much for the very interesting panel discussion, and thanks, Doug, for the presentation of all of the amazing facts and figures at the start. I suppose my question is about, there's been a number of references to if we can reduce food waste by 20%, 25%, 30%, we can feed X number of people. When you're looking at the figures in that context, are you taking into account the redistributable food? And if so, how are you sourcing the data on that? So I suppose what it's really about, food waste overall, we have figures on, but actually how do we get to understanding how much of that food is actually redistributable? And is that something that you're looking into in the reports that you've done?
Yeah, the numbers we cited on the amount of food that is wasted comes from the FAO, right? And that's where the 1.3 billion tons comes. Though FAO will acknowledge through a series of reports since 2015 that there's some educated guessing there because not enough countries actually truly report. And I think that's as Yves mentioned, that's a challenge in a lot of places. So the goal is to have food loss and waste from post-harvest all the way to the consumer. And depending on the type of country, that food waste, loss or waste will be different, right? So in high-income countries, it's more at the retail and consumer end, and in lower middle income and low-income countries, it's more at the agricultural side. So one, we know how much roughly is of food for human consumption is lost. The target is to have that. And then using World Resources Institute data, there are estimates if we captured 25%, what would that do? And that would be enough to provide meals for, in the case of Latin America, just 25% reduction would be enough to provide meals for 300 million people. And that'd be substantial progress then. I think the challenge for us is, and Dr. Lambert mentioned this as well, is that it's kind of bringing all the pieces together, whether it be logistics models, finding where, in fact, not all food that's produced for human consumption is actually usable in a food bank model. But there is well enough, and there's certainly well enough that we can make we're making greater progress, not in just preventing product from going to landfill, but actually reducing hunger in our communities as well. I like to think the research was so good you have no questions. So, is there anything else? All right, thank you. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, this is Srishti from Feeding India. You mentioned a little about the the need for sustainable projects and professional volunteerism. So if you could mention a few examples that you've noticed over the years, that if you could elaborate on.
Yes, and regarding volunteer work, we have lots of volunteers all over the world, but it's something that we really need to help is to train, to give workshops, conference, to prepare people, because to really solve the problem, it's not a matter just goodwill. Goodwill is very important. And we find in our corporation that we try to first to create a culture of volunteerism. In the United States or here in Europe, you have a good culture of volunteerism. In Latin America, we don't have that. So we are now trying to build this culture. We are trying also to convince people that they can donate time, talent, and resources. And we are working very hard on that, but it's not just that. We need to professionalize, we need to classify. And one good example, I'm sorry, but this is the best example, Egypt. They have classified people, they have all trained people. We need to copy that. And we are looking all over the world and trying to find good examples. Suppose in Brazil, they have a program that they call Satisfecho. Is that you can go to a restaurant and ask for a half portion of the food, you know, and you pay the whole price. They will bring half of this, but the part of this money go to the food bank to help that. You know, there are so many good practices. There are so many good things that we can do, and we need really to look around and also adapt those good practices. And I remember you asked something else that I don't remember. What? I can hear you. About what?
I think sustainable projects, is that right? Yes.
Oh, sustainable. Sustainable because we know we have rely for decades especially, well, all over the world. In Latin America, this is very common. We rely on donations. Everybody is waiting for donations. The economy and the world is facing so many problems right now. Each time it's difficult to find donations. And so what we are trying to learn is how can you make a food bank to be self-sustainable? You know, there are so many. You can sell products. You can also suppose to, if you have a good facility, you can rent this facility for conference or things. There are so many, in Monterrey now, we are just beginning a program that a food bank will do jam. And they will sell that product, and they try to find and to become self-sustainable. No? There are so many ways to do that. Mm-hmm. We needed to seek more social entrepreneurship than just rely on donation. Okay?
Yep. I might add to the volunteerism point, or the skills-based. I would say at General Mills, there is, throughout the world where we operate, strong interest and participation in volunteerism, specifically tied to food and food banking. And so while we see in the teams, they love the food bank events and projects because as a team, it brings them together, like cohesion and team building makes them feel like they've accomplished something together, and sometimes they get to know each other. Might be like a finance person and a salesperson and a marketer that don't necessarily get to, talk informally. So the food banking projects can be very helpful to build the team. But however, what we're seeing even more of is growing interest and growing participation in skills-based projects and volunteerism. So using their financial expertise, their human resources expertise, food safety and food science, logistics, et cetera. And so around the world, that can take different forms, but what I would recommend is at the food bank level, if you can maintain a list, maybe your team has a board or a digital list of like wish list projects you would like to do or needs you have, then when the companies come and inquire what opportunities there are, you can say, yes, we certainly have shifts and projects available to come and help sort and pack food, but we also need like a new brochure. We need a designer. We also need someone to help develop a webinar on food safety. So keeping that list going can be very helpful when companies come and inquire, how can you use the skills of our people? And I think that's important because while we talked about earlier today how one of the challenges for any food, I think, manufacturer and even retailers is that we might not have a steady, continuous supply of donations that is regular week to week. That can be like lumpy. However, by and large, there's a fairly continuous set of skills and capabilities and knowledge in our employee base, which is really what we consider our greatest asset, our people. And they have tremendous heart for this work. And so while certainly there's times of year or month where they might be extra busy because of deadlines, they have derived tremendous satisfaction as individuals when they're able to engage around food solutions.
Oh, yes. Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, I just want to, on behalf of the Food Banks of Mexico, I want to thank especially these companies that are on the stage, Bank of America, General Mills, and Cargill, which are the ones that have tremendous programs in Mexico. And on behalf of all the food banks of the world, I think they are an example for us, helping us to do our work, and especially to the global food banking, which has been the mean to get to them. And that's a tremendous job that you have done, all the team leading by the board members of GFN, Alan, who is there in the second row, and Lisa, who is leading the team of global food banking. So thank you very much, and congratulations for all of you, and applause for them.
De nada, mucho gusto.
Hi, Gabrielle from Feeding Hong Kong. One of the key points that's in the report is related to the environmental impact. By redistributing food rather than it ending up in landfill, how many greenhouse gas emissions we've offset. Have you taken into account the impact of our operations? Because obviously most of us as food banks, we have a pretty high impact. We're running warehouses, we've got trucks on the road, we've got packaging materials. Is this something that was factored into that calculation? And if not, is it something that in future you would consider trying to quantify that and include that?
Yeah, so you're right. What we looked at specifically were the clearest lines of sight to which data was available. And for us, the clearest line of sight was if this food is taken out, and using the World Resources Institute food loss value calculator and aligning that to the FAO food segment groups is how we determined the greenhouse gas emissions prevented by putting product into landfill, and then used Waste 360 as the measurement for food, for product, and how much was kept out of landfill itself as far as volume. The challenge is that each food bank operates differently, right, and in different parts of the globe, and it would have been an enormous undertaking to try and figure out how many trucks this food bank has and that one has. The other thing the study shows is that of the participating entities, FEBA, Feeding America, and GFN, there are 1,500 food banks that provide data for this report. The World Wildlife Fund did a very interesting study for Food Forward South Africa, in which they looked at the continuum of environmental impact that included everything from by product not going to landfill, how much landfill was not then having to be developed in South Africa. I mean, there are a lot of ways to approach this. I think for us, and it gets something that Dr. Lambert said, is that we have to be credible, right? And the most credible report for us to provide is if I feed a hungry person with a kilo of food, I can measure the kilo of food and the prevention of that going into a landfill. That is the clearest line of data that I can provide that is transparent and, in fact, credible. I do think and would encourage, because when you look at the report, you'll find that we pulled other environmental and human services studies that you all have conducted. That's very valuable. It helps shape our thinking. So we used Food Forward South Africa, the World Bank study in Mexico, and others. And so I would just say that as we go forward, because we want to continue to do this kind of research, as you have those ideas or do those in your own communities, please share that, because it helps inform the debate for us, and I think helps form the overall public policy debate.
I think it's a terrific question, and I just would add, so while instinctively we might react and say, gosh, we must factor in the different stages of development of different food banks in different regions. So while in Minneapolis, for example, there's a food bank that's 35 years old called Second Harvest Heartland, part of Feeding America, that's just expanded and built into a new facility. that is like LEED certified, like green certified, uses renewable energy, will be sort of a, kind of a carbon, net zero kind of carbon facility soon, and has very kind of innovative and advanced green features. It's taken 30 or 40 years to get to the point of having the community resources and will and support from government, private sector, and elsewhere to get there. So I absolutely believe we should be mindful that there's some food banks where we're working to get, our first facilities, our first cold chain, our first trucks, and so we're trying to prioritize. But what might be interesting would be, given that there's so much collaboration that's growing between Feeding America and Global Food Banking Network, might we be able to invite some of those food banks like Second Harvest Heartland that are innovating in a green way with facilities and trucks and logistics, to share their learnings and their plans and approaches, so that as newer and emerging food banks are in the position to build or expand a facility, you can be getting real-time insights and best practices from other food banks that might have had the benefit of 20 years prior experience.
Lisa?
So I actually think that's a really great idea. I think one of the pieces of feedback we would love from all of you is if you find that the calculations on diversion from landfill and the greenhouse gas emissions are really useful to your broader work, something we can think about maybe in the future is even just doing case studies of a select group of food banks around the network where we're able to calculate that carbon footprint so we can get a better sense of what it might be. Because I agree with everything they said, but I think it's a really important point. If we're going to be seriously involved in the environmental debate, that's an important thing to recognize. So thanks.
Yes, Dr. Lambert.
Yeah, for the people that are from Latin America, World Bank just released a big study about food waste and loss in Mexico, and they start with in the field and go all the way around, and they go to household, restaurants, and they could find all the hot spots where we really are losing a lot of food. And this is a fantastic study. They study in specific more than 70 items, exactly how much, how they measure. It's very good for us, and it will be very helpful, I hope, for Latin America. And because of that, Canada, United States, and Mexico developed a guide about strategic ways to avoid food waste and loss. They released that 2 weeks ago. They are preparing a version in English. As soon as they have that, I'll be glad to send to you, Lisa, and you can distribute for the people that are interested in those studies, because it's really worth it. They have very good information.
Hi, thank you for your presentations. Over the past 3 days, I guess we've seen different food banks. Some of them, their main goal and purpose is the waste side, the environmental side, that's what they say. And then on the other side, there's those that are focused on the social aspect and addressing hunger. Why do you think across different food banks there's a different discourse or purpose and main focus? Thanks.
Sure. My observation would be that food banks rely on community support to function. They need volunteers and donors and food companies and businesses, a broad array in those communities to be effective. And so they mirror those communities, those priorities. So, for example, the priorities of this model in the United Kingdom is somewhat different than this model in, say, a country like Ecuador. I met with Ecuadorians the other day. Is that it depends on what the community's need is most focused on. So I think that's why you have that emphasis in one food bank or one nation more than another. In the United States, I would say that it's primarily, they view themselves as hunger relief entities. They recognize the food waste aspect, but primarily there is the long-standing government social safety nets. They are insufficient to growing need. And so in the United States, the emphasis is talking about 45 million low-income people that are underserved. I think in a country, a higher income country, say in Asia or like in Hong Kong, The challenge is that it's an environmental threat to that community. In addition to providing the hunger relief, which is also critical, the environmental concerns rise. And so I think, again, the model of food banking operates at this nexus between these two things. And I think what Dr. Lambert and some others here have said as well is that, probably the next iteration for us is to talk more about this overall building of civil society, right? So we know we affect SDG 2. If someone in front of me is hungry, I can give them food, and I've at least addressed their hunger at that moment. And by our model, we prevented food waste. But there's also a multiplier effect in a community when I help a child or a senior citizen or someone who's recently lost their employment take that burden off their shoulders, right? Is that we know, for example, that hunger in a community brings down GDP by 1% to 2%, depending on the rate. You all help participate in not letting that happen, right? And so that's really important. And I think the messages have to kind of fit both the audience, as they've all said, but also reflect the community in which you draw your support from. I hope that answered it.
I'd like to share my experience because, as I said, that at the beginning we really want to reduce food waste. Then I come back to China and to set up a food bank, and finally I found if I just tell people that I want to reduce food waste and please donate food, then companies they don't care. But if I tell them that there are a lot of people in need, can you please donate food? Then they will. So finally, I think it's the same for us. It's for Green Oasis, it's the same. So it's like the combination of reducing food waste and zero hunger. So it's my experience I'd like to share.
Yeah, that's right. And I think similarly, as we talked about earlier, really knowing what stakeholder group and maybe even what subset within a stakeholder group you might be speaking to at any given point in time, and adjust accordingly. So when I go to colleagues like in our supply chain organization that might be running plants or involved in best practices across plants, I will adjust my approach and my vernacular to tie into their zero loss culture goals, zero food and ingredient waste and loss, zero accidents, and understand what their priorities are and help them see how food banking and food recovery supports those objectives. And similarly, I think across these last two or 3 days, there's been terrific conversation about just, gauging within, whether it's at a country level or a market, what the dialogue is, the discourse, whether it's with government and media, and making, smart choices about how you lead with your narrative about there's so many rich benefits involved in food banking that you want to be thoughtful about what you lead with in different settings and at different times. While we can't be fickle and jump hour to hour, if you're in an environment where it's all about using fresh water wisely, since more than a third of the people in the world are facing water scarcity, we should talk about the fact that using food more wisely is a huge solution in that fresh water, 70 to 80% of fresh water use in the world is to grow and produce food. So just being mindful of that. And I don't think it's that different from how, we behave for those that came from food industry. Like if you're a marketer or a salesperson, you always think about what is that consumer benefit or attribute of the product that you might lead with. Like if you have a can of tuna and we don't make tuna, you might talk about how it's portable food, or it's high protein, or it's gluten-free, but you need to know your audience and understand what they care about. I think it's the same thing with even, the civil society sector. Like, think about your audience, what their priorities are, and what they're being held accountable for, and adjusting approaches accordingly, I think is a key.
Yep.
Hi. Nicola, thank you so much for that very insightful response, because I will say that I'm feeling so enlightened in so many ways from the last 3 days, and yet also really equally conflicted, because at a country level, I'm seeing that conflict play out. There's literally a split in the country where, half the messaging is focused on food waste, and the other half is really focused on poverty alleviation. And while in some respects, I absolutely think that the utilizing surplus food to address short-term food insecurity is great, that there's potentially still a rather substantive gap in how you address poverty. In other words, how you develop individual self-sustainability to support oneself. And I would say the history of food banking, for those that have long histories in it, is really about poverty alleviation. That was the origination. And the newer focus on food waste, I completely respect, I appreciate, but I would say it can be very challenging and creates, I think, competitive and confusing environment, because again, the public retains only so many messages, and they've got a barrage of messaging. So just, I appreciated your thoughtfulness, but I think this is also incredibly complex in specific markets.
Anyone else?
Hey, Ryan Hardy from the Tafel in Germany. Just a green solution to hunger is a really interesting approach, and I think getting back to one of the questions over there about it's all embedded in a social and political context. And one of the things that I've realized from this is that this session is that we all come from very different countries, and in Germany there's a very high level of social security and safety, but we still have these problems. But it's nothing compared to countries like in Egypt. In the last session, I was thinking like, oh, 600,000 meals per week or whatever the number was, and what's the impact of the aluminum trays on the environment? And that's maybe a very German perspective of it, but I think all of these things do factor into our work. But at the end of the day, any of us are only able to save a fraction of the available edible food. So I think our biggest job is to be at the table with companies and in an advisory capacity also with governments. And I would just get back to maybe a positive example and a very recent example that we have with our cooperation with General Mills. Just engaging with the people who work there. They asked very critical questions, one of which was, why are we able to donate our own product, but not the products that we produce for other labels in the same factories? And that's not an issue with General Mills, but with the other companies that they produce for, and that's also something that's been plaguing us for years now. And so it's really good to be at the table on a policy level or with the companies in exchange to be able to inform that, because I don't know if that should be our goal, is to save more than, if we're at Germany at 3 or 4% of the total availability, do we need to expand by 20-fold to be able to save 100% of the food, or do we need to maybe work with companies to reduce food waste at the source and with governments to work on issues like liability and things like that? So that wasn't really a question, but it was a very insightful panel. So thank you.
Good. We're good. Right? Thank you all. And thank the panels.
It's really a pleasure.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I'm Alan Gilbertson, and I am the chair of the Global Food Banking Network. It's a great thrill for me to be able to be here for this week. And one of the things that gives me a huge pleasure and pride in the GFN team is to see how much FBLI has grown. So huge congratulations to the GFN staff and to Faber, our partner in this FBLI. And to you, thank you. Another area in which I take great pride in the growth that I've seen in GFN in recent years is our ability to provide challenge grants. And in this next section of the conference, I have the pleasure of announcing this year's Zero Hunger Food Bank Challenge grants. Food hunger has been on the rise for 3 consecutive years now, and yet, as we've heard repeatedly in the last 3 days, there is an abundance of food around the world, an abundance of food waste which we can tap as food bankers. GFN is committed more than ever to helping you, to support you as you achieve your goals. The Food Bank Challenge grant started last year. We, in the second year, branded it as the Zero Hunger Food Bank Challenge, and we invited you to submit proposals for projects to receive support. Those projects would, through that support, improve the volume of food provided and quality of food provided to your recipients through infrastructure investments, through additional staff support, and through expansion of programming. We're delighted to recognize the winners of these reports, these grants this afternoon. But before we do, let me say that none of it would be possible without the tremendous support that we have received from the General Mills Foundation and also important support from PIMCO. Thanks to their contributions, I'm delighted that $800,000 US was available for grants for this year's program. I'm even more delighted to have had the opportunity to interact with a number of the people from these organizations, and I find them without exception to be, not surprisingly, thoughtful and considerate people. I would add that I found them without exception to be simply nice people, and that's a great pleasure. I'm delighted to welcome to the stage one of those thoughtful, considerate, and nice people, and that is the President of General Mills Foundation, Mary Jane Melendez. Mary Jane will share a few words.
Thank you, Ellen, and good afternoon, everyone. I just have to say, before I came up here, I was reflecting back on the last couple days. This is my first Food Bank Leadership Institute experience, and I'm walking away with such gratitude for everything that each of you is doing. I have met some of the most amazing people over the last 3 days who are working so hard to do good for others. And that's a very rare thing, and the world needs more of it. And I want to just say thank you from the bottom of my heart, from the team at General Mills, for everything that you're doing to make somebody else's life a little better and to make our planet healthier and better for the next generation. So thank you for that. As Ellen said, my name is Mary Jane Melendez, and I have the honor of serving as the Chief Sustainability and Social Impact Officer at General Mills, as well as President of the General Mills Foundation. And it has been our privilege to partner with the Global Food Banking Network for nearly a decade, providing food donations as well as financial grants from the General Mills Foundation to advance its mission and the incredible work that each of you do every day to nourish hungry children and families all around the world. While there's certainly a lot of other big food companies out there, what I think truly sets General Mills apart is the depth of our commitment to people and planet. We believe that we can use our size as a force for good to help strengthen communities, nourish people, and even preserve and regenerate the natural environment. Like many of you here today, we have seen firsthand the power of food to transform lives. When children gain access to meals at school, they are nourished and better able to learn. When families consistently know where their next meal is coming from, they can take care of their family, focus on work, their kids, and their children's education. When good food gets redistributed to hunger relief agencies and not to landfills, communities and our planet thrive. These are just some of the reasons why we believe that few philanthropic investments have greater impact than investments in food banks when it comes to addressing world hunger and making the world's food system more sustainable. Through General Mills' support of food banks around the globe, which now goes back over 4 decades, we aim to ensure that surplus food used by communities nourishes people rather than goes to fill landfills. At its core, the Zero Hunger Food Bank Challenge is about identifying and overcoming the barriers that can unlock a food bank's potential to significantly increase the amount of food that it redistributes to people in need. It has been General Mills' honor to support GFN in developing this competitive grants program, and we wish to extend our heartfelt thanks to all of the food banks who submitted proposals this year. Thanks to each of you for the important work you lead every day in communities around the world. It is vital work making a difference. With that, I'm going to turn things back over to Alan, and we would love to take this opportunity to recognize each of the winners of this year's challenge.
Mary Jane, thank you for those words and for your incredible support, both of which are appreciated. This year, we had 15 applicants for the grants. It's a really tough process to pick some winners from those. I'm so glad that I was not on the selection committee. But I would like to acknowledge the hard work and thoughtfulness of the selection committee. Thank you. Your quality of applications made their work really tough. We can't help everybody, and I would like to say a word or two for those who were not selected, that it does not mean that your proposal was not a wonderful proposal. Without exception, all of the proposals that we received were terrific. And I hope that even though you may not receive a grant today, that you will find alternative funding so that you can go full tilt ahead with your proposal. With that said, let me announce one by one, please, this year's grants recipients. And I'm going to suggest that we come up one by one for a photo with Mary Jane. But maybe it's a good idea if the grant recipients afterwards could perhaps just stay to the side. So we might want to get a group picture at the end, please. So the first grant was awarded for a project to increase its food and fund donor networks to the Network of Argentine Food Banks. Can you hand it over and I'll join you? Yes, please. Our next winners have come from a very long way away for their project to expand services to rural and indigenous populations, the Food Bank Australia Northern Territory. Next, we have, for their warehouse capacity building project, the Food Bank Quito from Ecuador. I think there must be something in the air in Ecuador, because the next one is for the Food Bank Diaconia, also from Ecuador, for their warehouse capacity building project. For their project to develop their cold chain, the Food Bank Honduras. Oh boy, there's going to be a lot of noise for this one. For the food sourcing training project, Food Banks Mexico. We have 3 more. For their project to begin food rescue from the national wholesale market, we have the Food Bank Panama. And 2 to go. Drum roll. For their project to begin food rescue from the national wholesale market, Food Bank Peru. And last but not least, and I was not part of the selection committee, I hasten to add, for their project to expand their food sourcing and storage capacity, Food Forward South Africa. And not so fast. Perhaps we can, before we go, perhaps we can just get everybody in one place. Ken, do you want to direct where would be helpful? Congratulations to each and every one of the grantees. This competitive grants program has had a significant impact on the results of the first-year recipients, so we feel confident that you will all enjoy the same success, and we look forward to reporting on your results as winners of this year's grants this time next year. And I'm delighted that GFN expects to be able to continue to offer the competitive grants program again during the next year, so stay tuned and watch out for details. I now have 2 minutes and 3 seconds left, so I'm going to use about 5 of those seconds to say I'm going to hand over to Lisa Moon and Jacques van den Schrik of FEBE to provide final thoughts and the closing remarks on FBLI 2019. Thank you very much.
I know everyone would like to go, so I'm not going to be long. Thank you, GFN, for the opportunity to participate to FBLI 2019. We thoroughly enjoyed it. I thank also the sponsors and the speakers and the moderators for their huge contribution. And I thank you, all of you, for participating to this most interesting session. I would like to quote a provocative statement from Jean Ziegler, a Swiss philosopher. I'm sorry if it is provocative, and I don't want to put the atmosphere down, but it made me think a lot and hard, and I hope it will do the same effect on you. Today we produce enough food to feed 12 billion persons. To put it in another way, every child who dies from hunger is assassinated. I felt this statement extremely important, and I think it is worth thinking about it. But now let us be a little more enthusiastic, and let's meet next year. I think you will know soon where. And let us all be tomorrow better than today. And to achieve that, there is only one way. Dream harder, dream higher. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Jacques, for that both high and low moment as we close this session. So I just want to again echo thanks to everyone just for taking time to be here with us. There was an enormous number of people that went into making this event happen, and I just want to take a moment to recognize all of them. So when I call your name, if you could please stand. On the GFN staff, there's 16 people here, but our whole organization of 20 people really did a lot for this week. So I want to acknowledge Ana Catalina Suarez-Pena, Donna Choi, Katie Lutz, Craig Nemitz, everyone should be standing, Chris Rebstock, Beth Sachs, Kathy Wood, Monica Dykes, Hallie Aldine, Alfreda Kostorff, and then to 3 people who really lived and breathed this event for the past year and several months, David Millar, January Zell, and Anthony Kitchen. If you could please join me in thanking them for all their hard work. And embarrassingly, I forgot to recognize Gabby Reno. Gabby, I'm sorry. We applaud you as well. I know. We also have a number of people that have worked with FBLI for a long time. If you've been with us before, you may have seen them in Houston. We have Ken Jones and his wife Yvonne, who are our photographers. We have the amazing people from Donati back in the translation booth. And then here we also had a film crew from Mano Mano who did a lot of these video functions and facilitated our live stream, so thanks to them. And then to all of the speakers and people that took time to come up here to prepare your remarks and slideshows and just give us your thoughts on what's working, whatever your community is. We want to thank you just for being here and being so generous with your time and with your thoughts. So thanks for that. I also just want to say thank you again to our sponsors, including our mission sponsor, General Mills. I'm just a couple reminders. There is an evaluation form that we're going to ask you to fill out, and we're embracing technology, so it is available online. You'll also receive a link. If you want to go ahead and be really proactive and fill it out now before the dinner, I believe it's on page 16 of the FBLI handbook, so please do give us some feedback. If we don't cover something in the evaluation form, we absolutely welcome unsolicited feedback. So let us know what about this week was great. Let us know what you would like to see differently next year. We really want to continue to strengthen this forum, so please do take some time to give us your thoughts. So obviously we're all very excited about FBLI 2020, and we are going to take a moment to just share with you where we'll all be meeting in a year's time, and I believe we have a video.
Thank you very much. Lisa, thank you very much. We are very excited to have the honor and the privilege to host you in Mexico in 2020. And I thank very much to all the GFN team, the board, and our team, a Mexican team who made this possible, not only in the video, but in the reality to feed people in Mexico. So I want to make a quick survey. Somebody that had not drink a shot of tequila, raise the hand, please. We will make sure that you take it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. So we are currently looking at dates for this event. We anticipate that we'll be announcing them in a couple months' time, so please stay tuned for Save the Date. So this ends our formal program for this afternoon. We invite you all to join us for cocktails starting at 6 o'clock, and it's going to be in the Sentosis Suite, which is like across the way, but come to the lobby and our staff will be directing you to that. And then we're gonna have a seated dinner at 7 o'clock. So it'll all be a very fun event. I hope you're able to be with us. Let me just say in closing, there's an African proverb that says, if you wanna go fast, go it alone. But if you wanna go far, go together. And we're just so happy to be on this journey with all of you. So thank you again for coming. Enjoy tonight and safe journey back home.